Alright, I've recently completed a larger painting and I've been recording some of the process of getting that painting done, and I'm going to just share a quick sort of highlight reel with you. But I also thought that it may be useful for you to see some of the brush strokes, the sort of general approach, the layering, and from start to finish. You can see the painting behind me, I think in the camera, with the willows there, and then just have a look at how I go about putting this painting together. I'm basing the painting on these two references, loosely going to join them up and create something quite atmospheric. So I'm going to just speed through the setup of the composition. I've toned the canvas with red and orange acrylic paint, and just using some ultramarine blue and a bit of burnt sienna and getting into the basic composition. The river, creating a line for the eye to proceed along with three of the boats as points of interest, leading to the, I guess you'd call it a Japanese style bridge down the river there. But keeping that very subtle, it's going to be a very atmospheric, kind of misty or hazy. The water has a lot of color, and I'm going to try to keep that nice and warm. So now I've got the composition done, and day 2, I'm starting to add a lot more color. Still kind of blocking things in, of course. You can see a lot of the red canvas. Now, I'm calling the painting Willows or Willows with Boats. I haven't quite finalized that yet, but the point is there's lots of willow trees, and as you know, they will have these very sort of romantic drooping branches and leaves. So there's a lot of that, and a lot of brush strokes, vertical brush strokes. You can see the bridge. I've just got that reference as an idea. The main thing is, though, is simply to suggest that bridge down, further down in the river there, and not make it too prominent so it doesn't attract the eye very strongly. The eye's got to move from left to right, not just go racing off to the right-hand side. So that bridge is going to be in the sort of hazy, humid air, something like that. The concept also is very much an impressionist painting, more traditional impressionist, if you could call it that, with a lot of broken color. Now, this is quite a long demonstration, and I've brought it down to just under an hour in this video, so I can't expect anyone to watch it all in one go. But if you take your time and go through it, I just want you to have a look at some of the brushwork and how I build up the layers. I'm using a number 8 brush, which isn't the biggest brush for such a large canvas. The canvas is 1 meter by 72 centimeters, so I could easily use a number 10 or 12 brush. But the shapes of the strokes are suggestive of the willow trees, and I want that motion or energy to come through. So the number 8, used quite vigorously, is going to help with that. Now on the right-hand side, you can see the colors are softer. There's some white paint, a bit more white paint to cool down and soften those colors. Also, the edges are much softer because the values of those colors are fairly similar. And things start to warm up as we move from right to left. The warmest, biggest strokes of the brush will be at the bottom left of the painting. And that also helps to create a sense of space and transition space from foreground left to distant right. A lot of the strokes for the water are horizontal with occasional vertical strokes. The brush being used to vary strokes to create broken color, squiggly lines, dashes, scrubbing in, and as part of the blocking process, a lot of the strokes are pretty much scrubbing like I'm doing here, just getting things happening, getting some energy. Strokes, downward strokes, short strokes, going back and forth with the brush, all helping to create energy and interest in the painting surface. Although I try to work as quickly as I can, sometimes I've just edited out all the pauses where I've had to stand back and have a look and think about things, just so you don't spend forever watching the process. So you're looking at the main elements as they develop. And as I said, trying to get some energy into the brush, translate that into interesting brush strokes. I find also that if you have something to motivate you, maybe some good music or something like that, get the mood right, you get your energy flow, and you can paint some vigorous brush strokes, and it does help. It does come through. I'm not too worried about mixing one stroke into the other at this early stage. We're still blocking in a lot of the canvas, still showing. In these boats, I'm just getting a light-dark relationship there. I'm testing colors, whether the boats will remain those colors or not. Not that important, as long as there's a light and dark, or light and shadow. So that will evolve. A lot of the painting is going to evolve as we go. I also like to work one area and then go to the other. So right to left, top, bottom, whatever it is, keep working the entire painting. So I'm repeating some of the blues in the water, and also to test that idea, but also to create a harmony of colors. Whether I stick with having blues reflecting into the water or not will all depend ultimately on how the painting evolves. It may not remain that way. So in some respects, this is very much a painting from the imagination. Although the composition is based on those references, the idea behind it is really just a impressionist atmospheric scene. So I want a certain look by the end of the painting, and when I've achieved that, then I'll stop. It's not to have the painting look like the photographs. There's a time and place for having a painting that looks close to the reference, of course, but in this case, it's more atmosphere than getting the subject as accurate as possible. Reflections will reflect darker, obviously, than the positive shape, and darks will also reflect somewhat lighter. I think another important idea with a painting like this, a larger painting, is you've got to commit to it and try to work with some vigor and energy, and otherwise you're going to lose momentum and you won't finish the painting. It's also in relation to the idea of perseverance. As you know, to finish a painting, you've got to stick with it, even through that ugly stage in the middle, and it seems that the painting is not going the way you perhaps imagined. Do you abandon the painting, or do you keep going on? I think if your idea is a sound one and the concept is certainly feasible, paintings like this can look good or pleasing if you do it right. So carry on. It's not like this is a completely unreasonable topic to tackle. So keep the basics in place. Keep your relationships between light and dark and warm and cool color in place. Know where the cool colors are going. Stick with that. In the middle part of the painting, there is willow trees in shadow, so we've got a whole series of cool colors. I'm using cobalt blue, cerulean blue, ultramarine blue, also creating violet from alizarin crimson and any of the blues, mostly cerulean or ultramarine. For the rest, though, it is my standard palette of warm and cool primary colors with burnt sienna and yellow ochre. And here, really trying to scrub in some color quite vigorously, and that's something you can enjoy. You can really get into the painting. These strong strokes create a lot of intention, and you can build on that. It creates a framework. One thing you also have to remember, you start with big shapes and you work towards smaller shapes. So don't start everything with tiny shapes from the very beginning. Rather work from large to small, refine the shapes through several layers, and you'll end up with something that is following the basic ideas of Impressionism, but with your own twist, your own unique style coming through. So these colors, the blues, the cool blues, the violets, obviously working against the yellows. The willows catching the sunlight are going to be a very warm yellow-green or even pure yellow in parts. And that's going to work with all of those complementary colors. And these are the colors I'm talking about, orange and blue, of course. A good relationship there, and it just adds that vibrancy and zing that wakes the painting up. Now the water is kind of muddy, and it has that sort of warm orangey look to it. In the reference, quite subtle, but I'm going to accentuate that. I want the strong warmth to come through as deep and rich color. Especially in the left-hand side and foreground, it can fade towards the bridge and get softer and cooler back there. So I'm going to let you sit back and watch how the painting evolves. And let's just get through the block-in stage, and then we can start developing the shapes into smaller shapes, and also seeing how the whole concept starts to pull together. Now you may be looking at this and thinking it's all these broken color notes. It looks quite untidy. Nothing is quite pulling together yet. Why don't you simply paint big, broad shapes, big, flat shapes? The reasoning behind this is that this is a painting built up with many smaller brushstrokes. What you're seeing is a collection of, you could look at it almost as pixels making up a picture. Each of the brushstrokes is one of those facets. And when the second layers go on, the edges of the existing brush marks get softened, or they overlap with the new strokes. And the painting takes on a greater sense of resolution and refinement. So don't worry if your first block-in looks kind of erratic and untidy. It's supposed to. It's supposed to look like it's still an unfinished painting, but it's sort of growing into itself. So just keep an eye on the overall development, let's say from warm to cool. Warm in the foreground, cool in the background, large shapes in the foreground, smaller shapes into the background, stronger edges near the foreground, softer, vaporous, atmospheric edges in the background. Those sort of big ideas have to remain in place. From that point on, it's simply how you choose to arrange your color and your strokes of color to develop the painting. So there's quite a deep sort of mysterious shadow area developing on the left. There's some structures there, a jetty sticking out amongst the willows there, but it's all going to be in shadow. And it's just a suggestion of some sort of structure as we head into the very soft organic shapes of the willows in the central part of the painting, and then once again linking up with something in the distance, namely the bridge. So this is the third day, and you can see now this bridge, the other shapes are quite strong, and I've got to get rid of some of that dark, hard-edged shapes to it. and get it softer and more atmospheric. But it's got to start off quite strong, and then you can go over it with cooler, softer shapes. But it's amazing how many strokes and fettling the shapes it seems to take. Something that's also apparent from this painting, and I've had family pointed out, and it basically is that this painting seems to be so much more soft and romantic compared to other paintings I do where the light and dark contrasts are stronger and the volume of paint seems a lot thicker. Now, you can be sure that this canvas is taking lots of paint. I've already used a few tubes of paint. And the thing is, a lot of paint is going on, but because it's such a large surface, you're not really getting that sense of thick and juicy paint and creating a sort of a jewel-like painting. That's one of the reasons why I like small paintings, because I can use a lot of paint and get that very abstract, thick paint, and it becomes much more textured. Now, while a lot of paint is going on here, there's a lot of space to absorb it all, and painting on a canvas also seems to take a lot more paint. But one thing I'm got to keep in mind when painting a large canvas, it's not something that you're going to stand right up close to it. Its full effect comes when you look at it across the room or even from further away. So it's more important that it pulls together at a distance and looks very atmospheric, soft. Well, that's the intention, and that's going to be a lot more important than creating something purely with an emphasis on texture. In this case, the textures are more suggested than made up of very thick tactile paint strokes. So a different intention and a different approach for that. What I'm trying to get is just a lot of vibration. It could be subtle vibration of colors simply by varying the brush strokes, painting back and forth and intersecting one stroke with the next, and subtle color temperature shifts. A little cooler here, a little warmer there, putting those next to each other and letting those little temperature changes play alongside and creating a subtle vibration, a visual vibration, of course. And that was a big part of the Impressionist painting idea. There are some stages when I feel like I am turning into a printer and printing out a painting. The brushstrokes just seem to go on and on. But these little strokes of varied strokes are a lot of fun to do, and the painting does actually develop fairly quickly, so there is some satisfaction in that. This painting is also much more about brushstrokes and persistence and a bit of stamina in getting the brushstrokes, going to the trouble of layering the brushstrokes over and over, cutting into existing brushstrokes to see if they can be made a bit more interesting. It's a lot more an element of this type of painting than mixing colors. The colors themselves are fairly straightforward, and as I said, with my standard palette, I have included cobalt blue, which sometimes I will do if I want sort of a sweeter, cooler blue, or to experiment with a little more variety in the shadows. But for the most part, as you can see, it's a repetition of brush strokes to create all of these sort of willow shapes, the twisting, falling shapes, without making them look too labored or laborious. Intersecting the shadows with the light shapes creates a more harmonious surface, so it's not two bits and pieces, but an intermixing and intermingling of lights and darks. Okay, we're heading towards, I guess, getting closer to a conclusion. There's quite a lot of work still to be done in the water. I think the willows have taken some nice shape, and there's definitely a sense of movement and some air and atmosphere in amongst the branches. And now I want the rich, as I said, that sort of rich, muddy color in the water to come through and create a glowing color from the foreground leading to the cooler background. So the shadows in the water are going to be mostly rich colors, darker browns, ochres, and the colors in the light, the water in the light, will be more of the yellows. So I've repeated a little bit of that richer color into the willows there, and that's set me off to bring a little bit more, or break up the blue shape in the center just a little more with a few sparks of light. Just twist the brush and let it fall. Smaller shapes towards the bridge, and then bigger strokes in the foreground. Repeat a few of those shapes into the trees, using now a bit of white and lemon yellow to get those highlights on the willows. And they are mixing into the blues, creating some sort of a greenish turquoise as well. Repeat a little of that into the water to harmonize the colors. A few highlights on the left. This side is fairly in shadow, so they can't be too strong as far as highlights are concerned, but just catching the edge of those willows. And this is how I work back and forth. One side of the painting, then to the other, and just go back and forth like that, and the whole thing develops. This foreground is quite an exciting part of the painting for me. I love the thicker, rich color going down. I think it is bringing a lot of energy and life to the painting. Toning down the colors and contrast has been quite difficult for me, because one part of me really does enjoy good strong darks and lights and very vibrant color. But if I'm going to pull off the whole concept of an atmospheric sort of hazy river scene, then I've got to stick with that idea and make sure I don't bring in strong reds now and oranges and etc. That's going to just create an imbalance, and I'll have to follow that along, and before I know it, the whole painting has changed dramatically. So as you can see, the shadows are a sort of cooler brown in the water and not blue or green. And that's just the way that the reflections are working. Sometimes water will reflect what's underneath it and not the sky, for instance. It just depends on your viewpoint. and picking up those warm tones from the water itself. So I want a little more light around that bridge, also in the distance. And I've also got the bottom right to block in as well. So how long will I work continuously on a painting like this? I'll work for about an hour and then we'll take a good break. I'd rather take my time and keep the energy up. I'm standing while I paint as well, and there's that bit of light beyond the bridge there. So it does sort of take up your energy, and if you lose your energy, you're going to start cutting corners, making mistakes, not correcting them. So I'll work for an hour, I'll then take a break and maybe come back and work in the afternoon or in the early evening. So all in all, 2 to 3 hours in a day's session is pretty much the way I like to work. And there's many other things that I have to do each day in the studio. Videos like this, for instance, also take quite a lot of time. But it's the variety that is actually more helpful to me than simply standing for hours on end painting. Far more important to work quickly and energetically than length of time. Having said that, you could still work every day and spend a week on this painting very easily. But it doesn't mean you're working 10 hours a day on a painting. It's simply not how it's going to work. I will rather put the brush down, as I said, after an hour and go and work on another painting, because it's a fresh challenge and a different concept. And then I'll find energy for that. That brush softening up the edges there, and that bridge is now starting to recede very nicely. A few cooler color notes here to echo the trees, but also to create a bit of color temperature shift amongst all of the warmer colors in the foreground. Very patiently building up these subtle grey tones. When I say tones, I really mean color notes. These grey color notes in the shadows. Once that's in place, I can then put in stronger color, if it's required, of course. But you got to patiently put the lower layers in place before you can go ahead with the final strokes, the sort of pretty colors that are going to get all the attention. Breaking colors, breaking up shapes, broken color. Now I've got the finish line in sight, but there's still quite a bit to do. This lower right area has got to be completed. Then back to the left to finish up the shadows. Creating slightly more vertical and horizontal strokes, more horizontal here to get a little bit of movement from left to right. Slight diagonal direction to these horizontal strokes. I'll keep doing this until I'm satisfied with the general sense of energy and color contrast between warms and cools. And these rowing boats, I just want them to kind of fade into the distance a bit, so making the colors a bit softer, almost as if they're picking up a little bit of cool light. So definitely getting to the final stages, there will be a lot of refining subtle shapes, touching up a few edges, making sure there's nothing too distracting in the composition, looking at the painting the next day, seeing if there's something that is really a discordant color note, changing that, adjusting it, and then sign it off. And this is the final result. Right, well, I hope there was a few tips in there that you can try out for yourself. If you want to try out a larger painting, then a bit of stamina and perseverance will see you through. It could take a long time, but just persist and you'll get there in the end. Okay, there's a free course for you up here as well, or in the description. Check that out if you want to learn a few extra things for your painting. Otherwise, please make sure you've subscribed to this channel. There's more videos coming and you don't want to miss them. All right, until next time, happy painting and cheers for now.